Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and as the Betrayal League has finally ended and officially is over, there's a couple days before the new league synthesis starts, and I do want to get out my opinions on the Betrayal League, basically just a bit about the actual league itself, how the league went, things that changed, but for the most part I just want to state my probably most enjoyed characters and talk a bit about the characters I played, because it is an extremely common question. Which character was the most fun you played for the league, or which one do you like the most? And yeah, I really want to just give you a definitive answer, even though there might not necessarily be one. I'll make one up because I personally don't really like to pick favorites of things. A lot of things are fun, and a lot of things are just very worth doing, exploring, going through. But fuck that, I guess. You guys want some sort of answer, I'll give you one. So the definitive answer for funnest build, or build I liked most this league, is Ice Nova. Simply because it was just so satisfying to shatter entire screens of enemies and put in good work on a character and actually get rewarded for it. You'd already know that if you watched the video. That's basically all I talked about with Ice Nova. You're putting in lots of work by doing several rounds of self-casting, then Ice Novaing, dodging, evading, pressing focuses, your flasks, your Val Ice Novas. It was just an absolute blast to play, and the other really good thing about it is I didn't expect that at all. It was a character I thought would be okay. Ice Nova is something I completely really overlooked when it was changed. I thought, yeah, look, that might be okay, but I had no real expectations for it. I tried Ice Nova out, and holy shit, it was probably the funnest thing I've done in quite a while, and wouldn't you know it, it is entirely self-cast. So there is potential for self-cast stuff out there to be very good, and it doesn't necessarily require huge tweaks or fixes, just strong skills that currently synergize and, like I said, reward you for your gameplay. So my funnest build, and maybe even one of my best or most effective for the league for Betrayal, was definitely Ice Nova Occultist, and you should be able to do it on plenty of other ascendancies too. So take Ice Nova, bend it to your whim, and play it however you see fit. Now, what was probably my second favorite of the 19 builds I did for this league would have to be Cockspin. Now that is cast on crit, Cyclone into Blade Vortex and Bladefall. It's not the strongest thing ever in the end game because you are very melee and the damage can be improved upon with plenty of other setups, but holy shit, this one was also really fun because you get to just zoom around maps, you run very fast, you have huge pack melting abilities through the Bladefall, just clearing out entire screens, and then the Blade Vortex being very centralized and doing really good damage to single target enemies. You felt pretty durable, you felt very fast, and you felt like you could take on the entire world. It was fairly flexible. You could have gone a few other things as well, like an Ascendant, and gotten a bit tankier and all that, and min-maxed a bit more for damage, but it really just highlighted a different way of using Blade Vortex than previously used, in just auto-casting sort of thing through cast on crit, and thanks to the new meta crafting that you could use with multi-modding and just using bestiary as well as the new bench mods, you could make some really insane cast on crit weapons, which is what we did with the Exquisite Blade that basically shaped a meta for the entire league. Exquisite Blades are just so much fun to craft, and I love the idea of the two-handed katana sword sort of thing, and yeah, it worked out really well in this build, and probably quite a lot of cast on crit builds could utilize that sort of sword and get a lot of gain out of it. So this is probably the second favorite build, even though there's quite a lot of close ones, which brings me into the next one, which I'm going to say is Armageddon Brand. Now, I mean, I guess a lot of it is to do with the fact that it's just so easy and so face roll, but it was also a very pretty skill and very satisfying to use with the Elementalist Ascendancy. You get a lot of prolif, a lot of shiny corpses, and it is just very satisfying to play because you're fairly strong, fairly effective. You do have to put a little bit of work into making it work skill-wise, and ultimately there's a lot of payoff. It was, I think, one of my first Uber Elder kills on the league, and that's with a 5-link with pretty damn budget gear overall. It didn't take much to work, and well, it was just a new way of playing the game, as brands were sort of a new thing. They were basically totems that can't really be targeted or killed and have a slightly faster playstyle, I would say. So Armageddon Brand was my favorite for quite a while when we first played it. but ultimately it got superseded by a few other builds, as I just mentioned. But it still has to hold a place in my heart as one of my favorite builds for the league, because it was extremely effective, budget, and also I think I had a rather nice microtransaction setup for this character in my little kind of mini Diablo look. So that's probably the top 3. That's all you really need to know. It is kind of entirely spell based, because yeah, spells when done well are probably just the most satisfying, easy and budget options out there, but you can min-max them, as you could see with the Cockspin character and the Ice Nova character, to slightly greater extents, but some are just super strong like Armageddon Brand and barely require anything. So those are probably the 3 favorites, but that said, I did play 19 builds for the league, and there are plenty of special mentions. The first real successful character for the league was Ice Spear Totems, and the Ice Spear rework did make Ice Spear very fun. If you use a Snake Pit ring, I think that can be chucked onto just about any Ascendancy and should clear the game on a fairly good budget as well. Tectonic Slam was just huge for melee, and you hardly felt like you were playing a melee character. It was overall fairly tanky and effective, and Tectonic Slam was probably the strongest melee clear I played for the league. As well as that, it is rather pretty. What else could we say? I'd say Mjolnir Spectral Throw was just pretty damn off the wall. It was very fun to make. Overall, probably needed a few extra tweaks to become more of a game-beating character, and beside that, I'd say Power Siphon was an incredible amount of fun to build too as an attack-based character. So was Voidforge Static Strike, because as far as attack-based characters go, you could get very big damage out of those two based off of a Voidforge or multi-modding certain weapons for Power Siphon. And then of course another caster, Incinerate Castle Channeling Trickster. That was actually probably one of my other close to top 3 builds, because Trickster's an amazing amount of fun to play while it's a caster and built well. And then Castle Channeling Self-Cast, it is still in a pretty good place, I think, when built correctly. You don't have to succumb to all of the totems, traps, mines, and auto-cast stuff, but hell, that's going to be better in the next patch anyway. So as far as builds are concerned, yeah, there weren't too many top tier attack based builds. They were still a lot of fun. I pretty much enjoyed every character I played this league, except for maybe the shittiness of Steel Skills, because I think they definitely need a good amount of gear to make work that I didn't really have available on the first character of the league. Attack-based builds can still be good, can still be fun, and I did have a large amount of fun with most of these characters, but those are the top 3 in case you need to know. And now that does take me to the actual Betrayal mechanic itself. So the Betrayal League overall was, I think, a pretty good league, but it wasn't really because of the mechanic itself. It's because of the previous amount of content we had from Incursion, Bestiary, Delve, all being smashed into one league, and giving you a vast amount of content to do throughout your mapping experience, throughout your entire Betrayal League. And it felt pretty damn good entering every map, not knowing quite how much you're going to get throughout that map, how long it's going to be, what the results are going to be, and it was just a very engaging league because of that. The Betrayal mechanic itself, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't as amazing as I would have hoped an entire league mechanic would be, and that is mostly because it was just a little bit confusing, not entirely rewarding enough, and also extremely dangerous for certain types of characters. It was largely my attack-based and especially my melee-based characters that did not have a huge amount of fun when grinding, especially in the last few months, or the last month, let's say, of the Betrayal League. In tier 15, 16 maps, if your map has even like one damage mod on it, chances are you are well capable of getting one shot at 6,000-7,000 life if you're not careful. And a lot of the time, you just simply cannot be careful enough, because there's going to be 4 of them going off at once, and there's going to be just 4 different telegraphable attacks that you're supposed to dodge. One-on-one, that's fine. Bring in another 2, another 3 of these syndicate members, and I don't know how they could possibly expect you to actually dodge that stuff or avoid that stuff. You had to then build your characters to be able to tank random one-shots while you can take on the rest of the game just fine. So for my characters personally, plenty of them could do deathless Uber Elders, deathless tough Guardian fights, fairly deep delves for my standards, but they would still get one-shot by some of these Betrayal encounters, and it just stopped being fun after a while. And then on top of that, like I said, not terribly rewarding in the end. You don't get too much out of a lot of these syndicate encounters unless you're really manipulating your syndicate tree, board, whatever it is. And ultimately, the mastermind fight that you see here in the background was kind of a clusterfuck. There wasn't much reward, as already mentioned. Only really one, maybe two items could possibly yield you some good results, and that is mostly Paradoxica. The other items, they're good, but they weren't exactly expensive, so they were very easy to get, very easy to buy yourself. But for the most part, you didn't really get too much of a reward through doing your mastermind, especially when your entire syndicate board was then just reset and wiped clean, and you had to start again, which was a bit of a kick in the nuts for every character, and always a good ending point to a character, because you didn't really want to keep going past that point. The actual fight itself, I just thought was a mess. Visually, it can be fairly pretty. There are some cool mechanics to it, some cool attacks, but I'm a guy that absolutely loves boss fights. I love challenging myself and going up against your Uber Elders. When Uber Elder first came out, it was a huge challenge. I absolutely loved it. Atziri, when that first came out, was insane, and one of the first reasons I fell in love with the game. Plenty of other bosses coming from Delve. You're getting like All and Kurgal, all those types of bosses. Most just one-on-one encounters I absolutely love because it challenges you and it tries to promote good gameplay. For this one, I could not get into it. I ended up learning all the mechanics, and you could for the most part outplay all of this stuff, but some of it was just awful, and the amount of green on green on green that made this shit uncomfortable to dodge was just not fun. Ultimately, some melee characters just had to stand around and do nothing for a while the mechanics were going on, because they weren't very melee-friendly mechanics. Like you'd have up here some of that bad ground that was just you're not supposed to be in anymore. She'd sometimes teleport there and just stand there and do some casts, and you just run around in circles until she comes back out. Or she'd pop a bunch of skeletons throughout that zone where you can't run into, that you're supposed to run on top of to explode before they res, and you just have no choice but to let them come up and then run around in circles avoiding skeletons while avoiding the boss, and they're pretty hard to see. A lot of the time it just felt like a bit of a clusterfuck, and you didn't know what you were doing, or you couldn't do much to combat what the encounter was throwing at you. And once again, heavy regen-based characters survive this sort of stuff much better, so it doesn't really promote the characters that don't have much regen. Like if you're ever taking Vile Pact on a character and you don't have Slayer Leech, you're fucked. Against a lot of these fights, you're just fucked. It's the most uncomfortable playstyle in the world, and that's a huge reason why Slayer Leech and Ascendant Slayer Leech was so popular throughout this league, previous leagues, and so on and so forth. So that's for the most part what I will say about the Betrayal mechanic. As a league whole, it was, let's say, pretty high tier. I think Delve would still be my favorite at the moment. It gave so much extra content that was different, fun, and very engaging. But this one, it clustered all those together, so we did get all of those at the same time. Betrayal itself wasn't that great. I'd still say, as an entire league, it was probably my second favorite, because I did put in a lot of hours in this league, and I found it very easy to put in a lot of hours this league. For example, usually for the past few years, I'd be playing 5 or 6 hours a day while streaming for most leagues. For this league and for Delve, I was putting in 7 or 8 hours comfortably every day for at least the first couple months, and then I settled into more of a 6 or 7 hour, but I could easily jump into an 8-hour session if I felt like I was doing something fun. For me, that makes a successful league, because I'm no longer grinding, I'm playing because I want to, and just there's so many characters I wanted to do, so much content I wanted to engage with. Overall, so yeah, second best league, not necessarily because of the mechanics involved, but because of the previous league mechanics smushed together, and also the crafting and some skill reworks, which will bring me to a bit of the crafting and some of the skill reworks and new skills and stuff. I'll start out by just going over the fragments here. This was part of the rewards, or the new reward system in Betrayal, that you could get through doing certain mastermind or syndicate encounters rather, and it was the Scarab system. Now, a lot of these were pretty cool and were fun to engage with and you'd like to kind of use. Some of them just really didn't do much and didn't feel like even worth popping. And for the most part, I quite largely ignored Scarabs except to get Sulfite Scarabs, which was a disappointing part of the league, that you needed to use Sulfite Scarabs if you wanted to do any real sort of delving. If you didn't have Sulfite Scarabs, you'd get to delve like once every 6 hours for 3 little nodes, and it's just not that much fun trying to, you know, find that much Sulfite out in the real world and never actually getting any. So just, it's good that you could, there's a system that you could buy Sulfite on demand, so if you're rich enough, you can just go ham and play lots of delve, but it's also bad that it's entirely gated behind that. And yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes next league, but it doesn't sound too promising. Otherwise, some of these are just useless, like the Shaper and Elder ones. You'd want to pop them on tier 16s, but you're not allowed to, so what do you do with that? Nothing. And Shaper and Elder items for a large part of this league were obsolete thanks to the multi-modding and meta-crafting that we had throughout the league, so they weren't very exciting. Otherwise, some things you try and fit them in, and you know, for the most part it worked, but it really promoted heavy stacking of sextants and quantity and rarity and all kinds of other stuff to actually make it worthwhile. Otherwise, it was pretty unimpactful. So some of these, like the Sulfite Scarab, was a huge game changer. The Bestiary Scarab was also very good, and a lot of the others were just kind of, well, you didn't really feel them, you didn't really need to pop them, and you didn't particularly desire popping them. So Scarabs overall, meh, I don't know. I don't really rate them too much. The next thing I'd probably like to go over is a crafting bench, and holy shit did this change the entire crafting game for us. It was a lot easier to access the crafts than having to level up several different masters, so that's a good thing. It's all condensed into the bench. The bench is a lot more intuitive. You got a search function. You can re-roll a lot easier through scouring, but the biggest thing is that it added a lot of really strong mods. So I think some of these could very well stand to be toned down, and it would still be very good and successful to use this sort of crafting bench and system, because a lot of them were very strong and overpowered, and the one that they specifically already singled out and they're going to nerf is the chaos, non-chaos stuff. So where are we going? Looking at this, and ultimately making something like this. It is very strong stuff, but it's not the only problem. I'd say being able to make, you know, 400, 450 DPS physical one-handers was a huge reason that two-handers were so shunned this entire league. You could make some pretty beefy two-handers as well, but for the most part, it wasn't really worth it, and it's why Void Forge was 5 chaos by the time I picked mine up. The strongest two-hander in the game, 5 chaos, because you could make some insane one-hand weapons through this crafting system, and I don't think that's entirely a good thing. It really was going to make just certain builds shine so much more and completely invalidate a lot of items that are currently in the game, and it just felt a bit too easy, a bit too much power creep for the crafting system. And by the end of the league, alterations were down to 4-1 chaos, and it's never been anywhere close to that extreme because crafting with this bench was just so powerful. It did, like, for the most part, I tried to avoid doing too much of it, but for a character like this one, my Winter Orb Lowlife, I could have actually multi-modded around 1 or 2 mods on every single piece of gear and had a very strong, very successful character. That's kind of a problem, I think, and I did that in a couple of these items like this one, and just a single mod around this one, and the Warlord's Marks, the Assassin Mark rings. Those were very easily multi-moddable, but for an Energy Shield character, you could have easily multi-modded absolutely everything, but I tried my best to craft outside of that box and do some off-the-meta stuff anyway. So crafting this league was extremely powerful, items like that as well, thanks to the Bestiary system and the crafting bench system, and it did change the game quite a lot, and it did feel kind of like power creep. Overall though, I don't think it was that much of a bad thing. I think they did just take it a bit too extreme with some of these modifiers, but otherwise I think it was probably a good thing overall because it did engage players to play more. They tried out more builds. I think there was more longevity this league because of that. That's just, you know, something I'm going to say as a instinct. I'm not don't have the actual numbers on that, but it felt like there was more people running around trying to craft, trying to play multiple builds because they could have access to these sorts of items. As well as that, I tried to play a lot of builds based out of a lot of items, and I did a lot of crafting, and it was pretty good for my enjoyment for that entire league and the game as a whole. And then besides that, I think the last thing I'll say is just some of the new skills that came out in reworks were all pretty good. It wasn't the best thing in the world that Winter Orb, Stormbrand, and Armageddon Brand were all so good and so intuitive as skills. And then a couple of the other skills, your Shattering Steel, your Lancing Steel, just fell flat on the floor as soon as they came out. Yes, we did figure out that Shattering Steel could be decent with Fork, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort to get that going, and ultimately you still have a payoff worse than any of these spells, and Lancing Steel was just clumsy and basically not really a good skill overall, even though it was the one I was actually most looking forward to when coming out. With those skills. A few reworks were insane. Ice Nova, looking at you. And hopefully the next league's skills all come together to be pretty damn good, and there aren't any too falling down at the wayside, and the reworks are pretty good as well. For now though guys, I think that's all I'm going to say on Betrayal. Like I said, for me, probably the second best league. Had a few of my really funnest characters on this league, and you already know the next league is going to have my favorite and most fun character once a week, every week, because I just like playing the game right now with the type of characters you can build, and yeah, sue me. It's enjoyable. So thank you very much for watching guys. Hope you enjoyed the league. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.